Chapter 32. Hitler. Who says I am not under the special protection of God? Hitler. My mission had to continue, and once again I found myself with Lialeb in the scanning place, as I was studying intensely for my next adventure. I had a great many questions before I witnessed the years of Hitler's controversial existence. As I researched deeply, I came across a description of Hitler that caught my attention. It portrayed Hitler as a radical evil. Some depict him as an unquantifiable evil, an evil taken to new heights and levels of cruelty. His was a cruelness that could not be measured or determined. It was the act of being evil, just for the sake of being evil. It was the maximum diabolic expression, which was unjustifiable and deplorable. During my search for Darkness's tarot cards, I was willing to face this new challenge. Guided by Lialeb, I had been reviewing everything about Hitler's life and epoch. Some defined Hitler as the evilest person who ever existed on Earth, and I wanted to study his character in a perceptive and fervent way. And that's why I relied upon Lialeb's guidance. This fantastic glimpse into the past promised to be unique, because at the end of my trip, I was going to come face to face with Adolf Hitler. Similar to many other occasions, I went to the time-traveling room with Lialeb, and once again I looked at the magic screen and felt edgy, as I wanted to begin the trip. Lialeb noticed my impatience. In his caring way, he looked at me as he revealed a knowing smile. Myra, everything that you're going to see is nothing more than the past. Remember, however, that the past is no more than the present, and the present is no more than the future, Lialeb said. What do you mean? I asked. Everything that you're going to see and experience could be happening right now, in your present. Remember that time doesn't exist. You must put your emotions aside and observe, learn, and bring Hitler's tarot card to us, Lialeb instructed. I was somewhat surprised by his comments, but I agreed to do as he asked. Lialeb continued. As you witness Hitler's notorious life, try to understand his motivations. Ask yourself the same questions that you asked me when we were studying his existence and his work. Look beyond what your eyes allow you to see and search diligently for what the darkness wants you to bring back to us. I know you can find it, Lialeb alleged. Lialeb accompanied me to the screen. I turned toward him and hugged him, and he hugged me close. I relished the moment, as I had a special kind of admiration and respect for Lialeb that I had never felt for anyone else. Lialeb had great patience and remained dedicated to helping me succeed on my mission, and he shared his wisdom in many ways. It was challenging to explain the emotions I felt for Lialeb. At that moment when we held each other, it seemed as if he was a real human being, as if he was just a man, and as if I was a real human being and just a woman. However, why did I feel and think that way? Once we abandon our physical bodies, our feelings of sensuality disappear? Alternatively, maybe we never lose the passionate feelings that are so much a part of our existence when we're alive. Through all my many carnations, did I ever stop behaving like the seductress Cleopatra? Was I still craving admiration and love? I felt Lialeb's touch overwhelm me and reach into the depths of my soul, and I wondered if he experienced the same thing. He moved away from me, little by little, with great tenderness. Then he said goodbye. Come back with the card that corresponds to Hitler and bring us a new commandment for darkness. I am sure that you will succeed," Leib exclaimed. I went through the screen. I found myself flying over the Austrian city of Brno am Main, close to the border with the German Empire. Austria was then part of what was then known as the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. The date is April 20th, 1889. I quickly add the numbers. 4, 2, 1, 8, 8, 9 equals 32. 3 plus 2 equals 5. Hitler was a birth number 5, the same birth number as Charles V, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Was Hitler with his birth number ready to emulate Charles V? According to the Torah, the number 5 is the tabernacle in the wilderness, reflects God's grace in the use of number 5. His number 5 is unpredictable, as it is always in motion and constantly in need of change. The world doesn't change. Its laws are eternal. Adolf Hitler was the fourth and sixth offspring resulting from the marriage of Alois Hitler and Clara Pölzl. There is much speculation regarding Hitler's childhood. Sometimes his behavior showed signs of being resentful and discontent, and he appeared moody, lazy, and temperamental. He was hostile towards his authoritarian and strict father Alois, who hit him and his brothers frequently. Adolf was firmly attached to his indulgent, hard-working mother. Adolf Hitler's father, Alois, was an illegitimate son, and for almost 40 years he carried his mother's last name, Schicklgruber. Moreover, in the year 1876, Alois took his stepfather, Johann Georg Heidler's last name. Hitler's surname was a result of an administrative error, Hitler instead of Heidler. And so I discovered that one of the most famous and discomforting names in all of humanity was not real, that do not even have within itself any real history. What is meaningful is that when we see a movie from that epoch, we always remember the typical Nazi official with his arm raised to reflect the military salutation position and the words, Heil Hitler. Maybe things would have been different if his name would have stayed as Schicklgruber. But isn't a name merely a name? Heil Schicklgruber. Sounds a bit weird. The truth is that a name denotes and determines the personality of those who use that name. From what I could see, Hitler's infancy had some degree of normality, although he regularly changed residences. The fact that Father Hitler was a customs official for his country caused young Adolf to live in different places, until he finally settled in Linz. Hitler exerted significant effort in school, but inconsistent thoughts tormented the young Adolf, and it was as if he had escaped into a parallel universe at times. Hitler desired to become an artist, but his father denied him the opportunity. Because of this, he lost interest in school. Although his father, Alois, died in 1903, his death did not help Hitler improve his academic grades. At the age of 16, Hitler attempted to abandon his studies to begin an artistic career. He migrated to Vienna, where he experienced difficult times. In Vienna, he was forced to live on a small orphan's pension and some minimal financial help from his mother. Hitler was frugal when it came to his expenses, and his pension allowed him to live modestly. He loved his mother intensely, and her death in 1907, resulting from breast cancer at the age of 47, brought about lasting emotional scars. He was utterly devastated by his mother's death, and the message sent by the number 47 would remain with him forever. After his mother passed away, Hitler lost his orphan's pension, as his younger sister Paula received it. In that same year and the following year, the School of Fine Arts in Vienna rejected Hitler because the school didn't think that Hitler had enough talent to become a good painter. Hitler wrote of that experience. I was in Vienna for the second time, waiting with burning impatience, but also with confidence and self-assurance, for the results of my entrance examination. I was so convinced that I would be successful that when I received my rejection, it struck me like a bolt from out of the blue. I owe it to that period that I grew hard, and am still capable of being hard. Perhaps it was then, during a moment of frustration and anger, that he decided that he would paint his own story, but not on a canvas in his living room. Instead, he would design his life by utilizing Europe as his canvas. The paintings he used for that would remain for all eternity. Moreover, his picture would become a reflection of his immortality. However, what is immortality? It is nothing other than memory, either a memory of kindness or a memory of evil, but in the end it's still nothing more than merely a memory. For how long does that memory last? Sometimes it lasts for a long time, and the memory of his mother never abandoned him. Adolf Hitler, also known as the Great Terror, was not able to come to terms with his mother's death. He was always indebted to the doctor who took care of his mother until she died. That doctor happened to be Jewish. Hitler was tremendously grateful, and he allowed that doctor to escape Germany before the Holocaust. Then what caused his ethnic hatred for Jews to emerge? Was this the type of hatred seated within him from birth? Or was this the type of hatred that was acquired? Hitler once noted, "The struggle for world domination will be fought entirely between us, between Germans and Jews. All else is facade and illusion. Behind England stands Israel, and behind France and the United States. Even when we have driven the Jew out of Germany, he remains our world enemy." Hitler struggled to survive in Vienna as an artist. When he finally ran out of money he had inherited from his mother's death, he was forced to live in a shelter for indigent people. Soon after, he found refuge in another living space for low-income people. His traumatic behavior probably came from those troubling years of his life, that irrational and maddening, hateful behavior that was an integral part of his upbringing and education. The anti-Jewish prejudices sustained by the Christians in the 19th century influenced Hitler tremendously, and Hitler developed his anti-Semitism during that unsettling time. Hitler was born and educated as a Catholic, although he never attended or went to the Catholic Church. He always considered Catholics to be less deserving and weaker people than Jews. Although Hitler hated Protestants, he had general admiration for Martin Luther, as he found him a genius and a reformer as well as an authentic man of the state. Hitler used Martin Luther's religious and political reforms as an example, and he compared it to what he considered the tremendous internal savagery committed by the Jews. This intellectual and political Jewish cruelty had brought about the birth and assassination of the great ideologists and creators of Marxism. Hitler once said that humanity had its hardest hit with the arrival of Christianity, and he affirmed that communism had become the bastard son of Christianity. He added that both Christianity and communism were nothing more than perverse inventions of the Jews. Hitler firmly believed what he was saying. He alleged that by protecting himself and others from the Jews, he was carrying out God's work. The most critical task of God, said Hitler, would be the total and absolute extermination of all Jews. However, isn't that what all religions of the light want? The belief of the light seek the survival of their kind, basing it on principles of irrationality. Their final objective is the destruction of all those who do not have the same opinions or do not believe what they believe. Hitler thought that out of millions of people, one person capable of looking into the future would emerge. So, Hitler rationalized, why not him? He was someone capable of seeing into the future with an apocalyptic strength based on subtle granite principles. He could change the religious ideas of those unserviceable masses of people. He saw himself as a Superman, competent of redirecting others so that they could take the necessary path destined for the free people. These new human beings, laden with strength and willpower, would have new faith, and with it would develop a new spirit for life. He believed that the Christian and Jewish religions deserved termination. Christianity would be recognized, but Judaism was flawed and therefore must be terminated. Hitler was looking for a new kind of Christianity. As a Christian, I have no duty to allow others to cheat me, but I must be a fighter for truth and justice. The years continued to go by, and Hitler, totally disappointed with his native Austria, left to go to Germany. For Hitler, the 5 years he spent in Vienna were 5 years of hardship and misery, and he blamed the Jews, because it is when I began to hate them. Upon his arrival in Munich, he became interested in architecture. However, he didn't have the necessary technical or artistic abilities, and after several attempts, he gave up. Was it because Hitler unconsciously knew about his mission? Alternatively, was it that he was seeking his death, and in that way he didn't have to execute it himself? Did he want to go unnoticed throughout history, or was he trying to be the executor of one of the most mammoth tragedies and savageries in history? Throughout generations, we ask these questions continuously. I observed a very vigorous and determined Hitler, who was impenetrable. I believed that he was aware of his mission, and he knew that he had to carry it out at whatever cost. He was willing to do just that. He was ready to be the leader of a new country. He once stated, "The art of leadership consists of consolidating the attention of people against single adversity, and taking care that nothing will split up the attention." The First World War was on the verge of beginning. Hitler did not pass up his physical exam, and he was declared unacceptable for service in the Austrian army. His medical report stated that he was too weak to carry weapons. So he returned to Germany and joined the German army as a volunteer. Hitler fought in France and Belgium. He started as a dispatch runner between the army bases, which was a dangerous position, as no runner lasted more than 2 weeks. However, Hitler survived raging fires, and he was awarded the Iron Cross medal twice. That was the first time in history the German army ever gave 2 Iron Crosses for bravery to a foreign fighter. Hitler once said, "Strength lies not in defense, but the attack." What about Hitler's personality? Iwe wanted me to go deep into Hitler's motivation. What was the essence of this soldier who had wanted to be an artist? Hitler continued providing pictures for the army newspapers, and he was injured several times, but always returned to the front line of battle. At this moment I am approaching an important date, October 15th, 1918. On that day, Hitler lost his eyesight as a result of the effects of mustard gas. He became a patient at the military hospital to recuperate. This event triggered the critical moment that altered the life and personality of Adolf Hitler. At the same time, it prompted the birth of one of the greatest tragedies in history. When Lialeb showed me several existing biographies about Hitler, he helped me realize that many of the historians and biographers considered this to be the precise moment when Hitler became conscious of the final solution. It was going to be the total extermination of the Jewish people. Why did this happen at this time in his life? As I got close to him, I concurred that Hitler was blind. Some historians believe that it was blindness produced by hysteria, and others believed that mustard gas caused his lack of sight. But the truth was that anger, resentment, and hatred toward humanity blinded Hitler. He was looking for someone to blame, and he searched for those who had betrayed the German people. Genocide was nothing more than the final result of that deep hatred against the Jews. It still exists against the Jews today, deep-seated within the European and Christian culture. However, the followers of the light generated that hatred and not the followers of darkness. However, wasn't Hitler a Catholic? Wasn't Hitler indoctrinated to maintaining that hatred against the Jews ever since he was a boy? Who can deny that? Why blame Hitler for something that had been in gestation stages for almost 2,000 years? It's at this time within this hospital that Hitler's blindness establishes the distinct moment full of resolve for the critical process to come. Hitler's loss of sight is representative of the ignorance of the Christian culture, which refused to accept its faults and its limitations. Their ancestral hatred incarnated within Hitler, and he was in charge of taking care of them until the end. Hitler was dismayed by the agreement made between Germany and the Allies in November 1918. Hitler was going to charge the politicians who caused Germany to surrender as the 11th. November 11, at 11 o'clock, was the date and time of the agreement. Number 11 contained immense power. What exactly was the darkness conveying when he used the number 11? The Versailles Treaty brought about great humiliation for Germany, and Hitler made it his goal right then and there to repair that injustice. Hitler remained determined to achieve his goal, as he stated, "But it remained for the Jews, with their unqualified capacity for falsehood, and their fighting comrades, the Marxists, by placing responsibility for the loss of the World War on the shoulders of the Ludendorff. They took away the weapon of moral right from the only adversary dangerous enough to be likely to succeed in bringing the betrayal of the fatherland to justice." Hitler recuperated and regained his eyesight, and eventually the hospital allowed his release. He continued to serve in the German army, and in 1919 he became part of the secret police in the military. One of his first missions was to infiltrate a small political party called the German Workers' Party, or DAP. That political party was anti-Semitic, anti-capitalist, anti-Marx, and extremely nationalistic. During this time, Hitler met someone who influenced him the most during his lifetime, Dietrich Ehrhardt, one of the founders of DAP. He was also an essential member of the new secret society dedicated to occultism. Ehrhardt was the publisher of an anti-Semitic journal, and he was an occultist and a vital member of the Thule Society. A primary focus of the Thule Society was a claim covering the origins of the Aryan race. The Thule Society began in 1918, and any member had to sign a blood declaration of faith concerning their lineage. As it states, "The signer hereby swears to the best of his knowledge and belief that no Jewish or colored blood flows in either his or in his wife's veins, and that among their ancestors are no members of the colored races." The Thule Society believed that the lost ancient city of Thule was part of Atlantis, and that the Aryan race was formed and developed in Atlantis. We both know in the darkness and in the light that Atlantis and Lemuria existed, and after the final confrontation of those two states, this game between the light and the darkness began. Darkness made it clear that I needed to pay more attention to this particular moment. But what was it that darkness wanted me to grasp? Until now it was apparent that Hitler was not the founder of the Nazi Party, as the party already existed. Hitler was only going to be chosen to continue the work that previously began with the Nazi Party. All Hitler had to do was follow the path, as history paved it for him. Hitler did not solely create the National Socialist ideas, but what Hitler did do was to implement those ideas and bring them to practice. So here is the ultimate question of all. Would there have been a Holocaust without Hitler? The seed was already there, and if it had not been Hitler, could it have been someone else? Could there have been someone similar, with enough hatred and madness, with the same purpose but a different name, to carry out the bedlam and lunacy? The Christian society wanted blood, and they tried to redeem the blood of their Redeemer with more blood. Hitler would eventually become the instrument for that hypocritical society, and he would take advantage of that to carry out their vengeance. In March 1920, Hitler abandoned the German army and started to dedicate all his time to political activities. Every day, Hitler built increasingly amicable relationships and had better and better connections with the political party. Later, he finally took control of it, and on July 29, 1921, Hitler became the new Führer of the National Socialist Party. The Führer and the National Socialist Party had just been born on July 29th, or what would be the same as 2, 9 equals 11, plus 7 equals 18, equals 6 plus 6 plus 6. Once again, 11 plus 7, and the catastrophic number for the Christian world, 666. The combination was already there, and the future of Europe was beginning to turn bloody. The following year, 1922, Hitler was going to be 33 years old, and tragic changes were accelerating. As Hitler noted in his book Mein Kampf, because the inferior always outnumber the superior, the former would always increase more rapidly if they possessed the same capacities for survival and the procreation of their kind. And the final consequence would be that the best in quality would be found to recede into the background. Therefore, a corrective measure in favor for the better quality must intervene, because the first forms of circulation arose there where the Aryan came in contact with inferior races, subjected them, and forced them to obey his command. The members of the inferior race became the first mechanical tools in the service of a growing civilization. The Nazi Party gradually continued its ascendancy among the low-income workers and the unemployed. Hitler's charisma began to gain more weight among his followers, and it's then, during this period, when Rudolf Hess and Hermann Goering started to engross the Nazi Party lines. Hitler continued to give speeches in beer breweries and stores, as was customary during that time. On November 8, 2023, he made a qualitative jump in his actions and provoked the coup d'etat for the beer hall putsch. Hitler wanted to imitate Italian leader Benito Mussolini and his march to Rome, and he began what he called his campaign in Berlin, which ended with a coup d'etat. Hitler and his followers went into the brewery where Gustav von Kahr, the leader of Bavaria, was giving a speech. Hitler took his gun out, shot twice up in the air, and proclaimed a new government. At gunpoint, Hitler and his followers were able to get support from Kahr and other military leaders who were present. I can hear Hitler yelling, "Silence!" and then he and Goering forced their way over to the podium. "The national revolution has begun," Hitler shouted. He continued, "No one must leave the hall. Unless there is immediate quiet, I shall have a machine gun posted in the gallery. The Bavarian and Reich governments have been removed, and a provisional national government formed. We occupied the barracks of the Reichswehr and police. The army and the police are marching on the city under the swastika banner." However, none of this was true, but the people held in the beer hall couldn't know. The higher officials of the government of Bavaria were held in the beer hall, and among them the head of the state police. The three of them refused to talk to Hitler. Hitler waved his pistol at them, yelling, "I have 4 shots in my pistol, 3 for you, gentlemen, the last bullet for myself." Hitler then returned to the podium. "The removal of the government of the November criminals and the Reich president is declared. A new national government will be named this very day in Munich. We will form a new German national army immediately. The task of the provisional German national government is to organize the march of that sinful Babel, Berlin, and save the German people. Tomorrow will find either a national government in Germany or our death." General Ludendorff later arrived at the beer hall. He spoke with the 3 officials and told them to go along with the Nazi revolution. Reluctantly, the 3 of them agreed and pledged loyalty to the new Nazi movement. Hitler then spoke to the crowd. I am going to fulfill the vow I made to myself 5 years ago when I was a blind cripple in the military hospital, to know neither rest nor peace until the complete overthrowing of the November criminals, until on the ruins of the wretched Germany of today there should have risen once more a Germany of power and greatness, freedom and splendor. The next day, November 9th, or 9/11, Hitler and his followers, more than 3,000 Nazis led by Hitler, Goering, and Ludendorff, marched toward the center of Munich and confronted the War Ministry for the political and military local leadership. The battle brought about the deaths of 16 members of the Nazi Party. That 9/11 was a day of tragedy and mourning for the future of Germany. Once again I found myself encountering that horrendous 9/11 combination. Hitler was arrested on November 11th and charged with high treason. The trial against Hitler began in February 1924, and on April 1st, 1924, Hitler's prison sentence was 5 years. He was not going to spend 5 years in jail because some months later, in December 1924, Hitler left prison, thanks to an amnesty granted to political prisoners. It was during the time he spent in jail that he authored the first part of My Struggle, or Mein Kampf. I realized that Mein Kampf is nothing more than the manifest of the Nazi Party, or the basic principles of Nazism. While he was writing My Struggle, Hitler announced the existence of a Jewish plot at a global level to be carried out with brute force, as he believed in the necessity of winning more land to build grander Germany. He called this a vital space necessary for the survival of the existence which he would obtain by increasing the borderlines on the east side of Germany, mostly toward Russia. Hitler kept insisting that the Jews had a plan to take over the world, so he considered the Jews a danger and one of the biggest threats as the Jewish religion and communism. The first volume of My Struggle came out in 1925, and it was entitled Retrospection. In it, Hitler wrote a recapitulation of his life, of the war, of the nationalities, of the race, and finally, he elaborated the first phase for the development of the National Socialist Party. The second part of the book appeared in 1928 and is called The National Socialist Movement. Here Hitler widely developed his vision for the party as well as the state, and he defends the right for a legitimate defense of the Germans. Up until this time he named his political struggle as 4 years of fighting against lies, stupidity, and cowardliness. Hitler had already declared his theory, but now he also had to establish his basis. I could see a more mature Hitler with more authoritative speeches. Each time his appearances became more provocative and better attended. Hitler revoked pride, and he called to mind the national betrayal and the humiliating Versailles Treaty as the cause of rendition for Germany. A few months after Hitler had gone to prison, the Nazi Party, for the first time in the German elections, which took place in May 1924, obtained almost 2 million votes, which is equivalent to 6.5%. Little by little, the Nazi Party continued to grow. After a while, it seemed as though there was no more growth. However, once again, in September of 1930, as a result of the economic crisis provoked by the Great Depression, the Nazi Party reached almost 6.5 million votes. The votes for the Nazi Party represented an 18.3%, and which gave a right to 107 parliamentary seats in the Reichstag. Amid all the political happenings, and despite the numerous demands on him, Hitler found time to fall in love with Jelly Robbel. Hitler and Jelly Robbel had a passionate and romantic love story, but it ended in tragedy when Jelly ended her life by committing suicide. All the women that were part of Hitler's life in one way or another sadly ended their own lives. When I saw Hitler in Munich and Berlin, it felt as though I, myself, had also lived during that period, as everything felt familiar. Then when I saw Jelly Robbel dead in Hitler's apartment in Munich in the year 1931, I felt a tightening in my throat and a fleeting recognition of the scene. There was something unclear and misty, something I couldn't comprehend. In the meantime, I could see how Hitler continued his political evolution. Each time there were more and more people attending his meetings, and each time there were more and more people listening to his speeches. He was capable of attracting more than 100,000 people, both in open and closed spaces. At that time, the Great Depression was affecting Germany, and unemployment and inflation were overwhelming and devastating. Germany was at the brink of bankruptcy, and the National Socialist and Communist parties were going to become the only two options for the German people. All members of each respective party would fight against one another in the streets, and the response to each manifestation was a counter-manifestation, which always ended in bloodshed. In the year 1932, Hitler finally obtained German citizenship, and he was therefore eligible to be included as a candidate for the German presidency. He ran for the office of president in July, and he obtained almost 14 million votes, and 37.4% of the ballots granted him 230 seats in the parliament. Despite being defeated by Hindenburg, his power became greater and greater. Germany continued to drown in bankruptcy and misery, and as a result, the country held new elections in November of that same year. The votes for Hitler decreased to less than 12 million votes, but still gave him 196 seats in the German parliament. The internal problems of other German political parties and the failure of the so-called cabinet caused Hindenburg in January 1933 to offer the German chancellery to Hitler. Although the Nazi Party was the most popular, they didn't have the absolute majority, and Hitler was able to get a coalition with the Catholic parties, which led him to obtain a majority in the parliament. I noted that Hitler attained his power democratically, but at that time he wasn't in command. He convinced President Hindenburg of the need to dissolve the parliament, and on March 1933 he called for new elections. Then the Reichstag fire blazed on February 27, 1933, and Hitler blamed the Communists for that fire. He took advantage of the power that he got from being at the head of the government to neutralize his political opponents. He then used the grand governmental machinery for propaganda in an evil way. In the election on March 6, 1933, he was able to reach 43.9% of the votes. He maintained his coalition with the Catholics, and from this point on he began to govern as he pleased. That year, number 33 of the 20th century, marked the beginning of no return and the most secretive and mystical part of Adolf Hitler's life. In August of the following year, President Hindenburg passed away, and Hitler took advantage of his parliamentary majority to attain both the presidency and chancellery positions. In this manner, Hitler, with the support of most of the Germans, became the Third Reich of the 20th century. The Third Reich would last for 11 years. It's during this period that Hitler got 85% of the votes from the German people. From this point on, the Germans began to choose the one who would become their great dictator. Hitler easily facilitated the Germans' decision, as he said, "How fortunate for the government that the people don't think. If today I stand here as a revolutionary against the revolution, and if freedom is short of weapons, we must compensate with willpower. I never lost my belief amid setbacks which were not spared me during times of struggle. Providence has had the last word and brought me success. All great movements are popular movements. They are volcanic eruptions of human passions and emotions, stirred into activity by the ruthless goddess of distress, or by the torch of the spoken word cast into the midst of the people." Then Hitler began to implement new economic strategies based on the rearming of the German military and public works, as his popularity continued to grow. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War raged, and Hitler supported General Franco. He sent troops out as he tested his new killer weapons. At this point, Germany began to prove what they were capable of in the grand Hitlerian era. As the dictator once claimed, "It is not truth that matters, but victory. I was able to see a triumphant and unstoppable Hitler. The German people were afraid of him, but simultaneously they acclaimed and respected him. Hitler continued with his expansion plans to create a greater Germany. He was able to convoke a plebiscite in Austria, which in 1938 was united by a great popular clamor. Following that, and with the consent of the German people, Hitler received the annexation of the German-speaking population in Czechoslovakia. Hitler once said, "The doom of a nation can be averted only by a storm of flowing passion, and only those who are passionate themselves can arouse desire in others. The leader must have the ability to make different opponents appear as if they belong to one category, because the very first essential for success is perpetually constant and regular employment of violence. And always remember that the great masses of the people would more easily fall victim to a big lie than to a small one." Hitler was already a dictator, and he thought that elections were not necessary any longer. He stated, "Sooner will a camel pass through a needle than an election discovers a great man." On April 23, 1939, Hitler and Russian Foreign Commissar via Molotov signed a non-aggression pact called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty. This non-aggressive pact between the Soviet Union and Germany lasted precisely 22 months. The agreement between these two cards of the darkness concludes with the symbolic number 22. The gods of light against the gods of darkness, the gods of darkness against the gods of darkness, the gods of light against the gods of light. There is room for all possibilities in this war game. On March 31, 1939, Britain guaranteed Polish independence, and Hitler took that guarantee to invade Poland and secure land that he would add to the new German Reich. He claimed that he shall brew them a devil's drink. And on the 1st of September, 1939, after adding the numbers 1919939 equals 32. 3 and 2, 5. The outcome is the same as Hitler's birthday number and combination of digits. 3 plus 2 equals 5. Hitler invaded Poland and began the most devastating war the world had ever seen. Following the breakout of World War II, concentration camps began emerging throughout Nazi Europe. First it was Hitler's political enemies, then the gypsies, then the homosexuals, and finally the extermination of the Jews, or what became known as the Holocaust. However, what gave origin to the Holocaust? In the beginning, Hitler did not want to exterminate the Jews. He just wanted to drive them out of Germany and away from Europe. Despite all that had been said and written, the German-Jewish problem was no more notorious than in any other European countries. In Germany alone, there were 600,000 Jews, in a population of more than 60 million people, which means that the Jewish community was not even 1% of the German people at that time. They considered a plan to send them to Madagascar. However, the war complicated everything. It was in October of 1941 when the final solution was elaborated and began to take shape. It was the end of a population, and that end was justifiable to Hitler. Out of a total population of 11 million, Hitler exterminated around 6 million European Jews. For Hitler, the struggle that ensued was nothing more than the beginning of all things. The human principles that human beings could have done did not matter. Only the basic principles mattered, as it was survival in a brutal world. Without a continuous struggle, survival is not possible. Hitler believed that in the end, people would solely judge either the success or the failure of his mission. However, his only decision was the means that he used to achieve that success. Victory was the only meaningful thing that he recognized. Everything else was unimportant. If Hitler had won the war, would we have spoken about the Holocaust? Or would the Jewish people have been considered as merely part of the victims resulting from the war? Those who won the battle are the ones who write history. As Hitler would say, The originality of an accomplishment and an individual's ability to achieve it is the basis of all human accomplishments. Would this savagery have gone unnoticed if Hitler had won the war, or if at least he hadn't lost it? Success is the only judge of right and wrong, he would write. Moreover, even though the Holocaust did take place, was Hitler solely responsible for it? If so, what to think about Darwin? Darwin's theory states that evolutionary progress occurs as a result of the elimination of the weak in the human struggle for survival. Darwinism justified the Nazis' view of race and war. The law of selection justifies this incessant struggle of the fittest. Richard Weikart defined it perfectly. Darwinism by itself did not produce the Holocaust, but without Darwinism, neither Hitler nor his Nazi followers would have had the sufficient scientific underpinnings to convince themselves and their collaborators that one of the world's greatest atrocities was morally praised. For Hitler, Sparta must be regarded as the first Volkisch or ethnic state. The exposure of the sick, weak, deformed children, and their destruction was more decent, and in truth 1,000 times more human than the wretched insanity of our day, which preserves the most pathological subject. What about the German people? Were they responsible as well? The Holocaust didn't merely occur because one man willed it and some others made it so. The Nazis' final solution was an enormous undertaking that required executive planning, large amounts of resources and infrastructure, plus the involvement of millions of people, not only the victims but the perpetrators, collaborators, bureaucrats, and bystanders. There was a high level of anti-Semitism in Germany, as had existed in much of Europe for centuries. You can look at history and see the number of European nations that had persecuted, exiled, and killed Jews in the past. Hitler used the anger toward the Jews as a means of political and economic change. Anti-Semitism was like the tinder for a fire, and the Holocaust only required a spark to unite it, and Hitler was the spark. It doesn't make sense to believe that the Holocaust could have centered exclusively within the Nazis, but ordinary Germans, both men and women, who butchered and murdered Jews both willingly and zealously. Also, what about the Church? Did the Church know about the Holocaust? Did they participate in it? The Vatican knew of the murder of the Jews from the beginning, as they have religious representatives in all the occupied countries, and the Church did nothing to save the Jews of Europe. The German Church said next to nothing about the Holocaust. The German bishops had plenty of information about the situation, but they turned a deaf ear to reports about the killings taking place, as the task of the individual as well as the Church is to obey the legitimate civil authorities. In 1941, Bishop Keller said, "In this staunchly Christian spirit, we also now participate wholeheartedly in the great struggle for our people, for the protection of their life and importance in the world. With admiration we look upon our courageous army, which fought under extraordinary leadership, has advanced and continues to advance to achieve unparalleled success. We thank God for his support. Especially as Christians, we are determined to rally all our strength so that our fatherland achieves final victory. Especially as believing Christians, inspired by God's love, we faithfully stand behind our Führer, who with firm hands guides the futures of our people." Inspired by God's love, we faithfully stand behind our Führer? These are the people of the light, standing behind one of the most powerful cards of the darkness. But they stand behind the Führer, inspired by God's love. Charles V also used light to promote darkness, and Hitler followed his example. Even as knowledge of their regime's heinous crimes substantially increased, the Catholic Church nor the German Catholics ever made a written protest against them, because they feared Hitler would accuse them of sabotaging the war efforts. I didn't want to be unfair to the Catholic Church, and I must say that they opposed the killing of the mentally infirm and forced Hitler to abandon his euthanasia program. However, German bishops were not concerned about the fate of the Jews, because they were not Christians, and their God, Jehovah, could take care of them. Why has Christian anti-Semitism been so pervasive in so many countries, in so many periods, and for so many reasons? Those living in Hitler's Germany hated Jews, as they saw them as an inferior race, and because they supposedly killed Jesus. Hitler noted, "I believe today that my conduct is following the will of the Almighty Creator." In Germany and other countries, people hate the Jews because they believed and still believe that they possess too much wealth and power. Is this true? The more than 3 million Polish and Russian Jews exterminated by Hitler, were they that wealthy? I doubt it. But because of all these prejudices, Jews have always been the scapegoat. I don't know of any other religious group more hated than the Jews, and still I can't find a real reason for that. But the people of the light like to blame them for everything, and many people of the light still believe that the Jews killed Jesus, when the Christian Bible clearly states that the Romans killed Jesus. History notes that anti-Semitism is something very unique amongst the hatreds in the world for its longevity. It has always been around. For its universality, practically every country in the world hate the Jews, and for this intensity, always expressed carefully. Do people hate the Jews because they are arrogant, claiming to be the chosen people? That's not different from Christians and Muslims who claim precisely the same uniqueness. The war continued in Europe and extended into Asia, and in one way or another it encompassed the whole world. Hitler's army was at the borderline of winning the war, but one of his biggest mistakes came about on June 22, 1941, when 3 million Germans attacked the Soviet Union. Hitler, as with Napoleon Bonaparte, had signed his death sentence. He often said that men who do not want to struggle in this cruel world of continuous struggles do not deserve to live. On December of that same year, with the inclusion of the United States in the Second World War, Hitler received a new battlefront, and so he declared war on the United States on December 11, 1941. On that same year, Hitler had utilized 22 and 11, two master numbers, to fight. Combined, they formed the number 33, the exact digits that Hitler sought for his death. Hitler's destruction would take place on April 30th at 3:30 in the afternoon. Hitler attempted to terminate something incapable of having an end. He always maintained that others would never help us, and so we must help ourselves, as our strength is our fountain of life. The power which God has given each of us is the only way in which we can win our battle for life. Hitler argued that God did not want us to live our lives as cowards. In July of 1944, a group of military generals attempted to stage a coup d'etat against Hitler. The bomb that went off did not kill the Führer, but instead provoked his sensory problems. From that point on, Hitler lost a significant part of his mental strength. He once said, "The great strength of the totalitarian state is that it forces those who fear it to imitate it." By late 1944, the Red Army and the Western Allies began advancing into Germany. Later that year, on December 16th, Hitler launched his final offensive in the Ardennes. While he experienced some initial success, his ultimate mission failed. Hitler once noted that struggle is the father of all things. It is not by the principles of humanity that man lives or can persevere himself in a criminal world, but solely utilizing the most brutal struggle. We were in April of 1945, and the end is approaching, as Hitler orders the destruction of all German industrial infrastructure before it could fall into Soviet hands. I wanted to see Hitler during his final moments. I watched when he married Eva Braun in April 1945. The Soviet troops were arriving at the Berlin Walls. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Hitler took cyanide. Then he shot himself, using the 331 number combination to put an end to his earthly life. Hitler died at 3:31. He wrote the number in his mind. 4 plus 30 plus 1945 plus 331 equals 33. The right time to die. Hitler and Eva Braun's bodies were buried and incinerated. Hitler did not want any of his enemies to find his body parts so that they could expose him to humiliation as he had seen done to the body of his friend Benito Mussolini. All of Germany was devastated, but remained active in spirit, in determination and perseverance to carry out his future mission. My time in Nazi Germany was over, and I had to choose the tarot card which corresponded to Hitler. I did not doubt that the tarot card that corresponded to him was the number 15, the tarot card for the devil. This tarot card represents all excesses and all betrayals. Within this card, the spirit of evil portrays triumph. On the right-hand side, the image which represents the devil is holding a scepter on 2 different bars. The meaning behind these bars is the triumph of the evil spirit. Its success is supposed to be the destruction of a temple, which one may interpret as the destruction of Solomon's temple, and later on as the destruction of Herod's temple. These bars are 2 vertical columns that form the number 11. These 2 bars represent different powers that struggle against each other. They will not allow the strength of fire, or in this case, the intensity of light, reach them. The card is the emblem of hatred, or the symbol of destruction. The devil possesses the axe of damage, which contains a flame. The flame applies to the ruins of the temple, and the ruins represent humanity, which the lights buried. The images of destruction and dead people are the vivid images of Europe just after the Second World War. The devil has a gold crown, indicating that he is not from this world, and the dragon or vampire wings designate that he is alive and that he likes to live in a world of darkness, or the kingdom of power. The horns located at the top of his head represent an endless and unconditional rebellion. In the world of light, it represents a rebellion known as the rebellion against the Creator. This rebellion was a rebellion against the original creators, and the cause was liberty, to achieve a condition where human beings would be free to choose. It is like a revolution, very similar to how Hitler defined himself, as a revolution with principles that compete against the very same principles of that revolution itself. Slowly, I left Berlin destroyed and in flames. I returned to the scanning place, and Iwe and Lila were waiting for me. "Welcome back, Myra," Iwe said. "Thank you, Iwe," I answered. "We don't have to ask you for Hitler's card. We heard all your thoughts," Lila said. "There is no doubt that the Devil Tarot card corresponds to our admired Hitler. Can you please continue with your explanation of the card?" Iwe asked. I began my explanation. The snake that emerges from the body of the devil indicates the use of creative energy. Creative energy used not for spiritual illumination, but the physical gratification of human beings. It's the body as the temple of pleasure. But what's wrong with achieving happiness and satisfaction through these means? The devil has a short tail to display and ratify his animalistic nature. However, his face reflects human intelligence. For example, even if he has the look of a crocodile, the face inherits the attributes and the characteristics of a man or woman. In the world of darkness, men and women do not exist, as there are only free spirits. The only 2 people seen in the tarot card are tied up with chains on their necks, and they're a male and a female. The chains represents the fatality and duality of the material world. You can see the devil moving away from the ruins of the temple, and the temple represents the diverse religions of the light. On the one hand, he has the destructive axe of fire and an arrow, which symbolically represents the many divisions and the hatred that human beings have against each other. Below, on his feet, there are two people tied up by chains on their necks, which represents those human beings who desire power and are therefore chained by that desire. They are in a lower position than the beasts. These people are beasts themselves, fighting other monsters and each other, even if they don't consider themselves to be that. The strength of the light is to give universal light, but simultaneously it is destructive. When that universal strength returns, because it does return, it comes back as darkness. The light has misled humanity since the beginning of time. Human beings are led to believe in false democratic doctrines, which in reality do not exist. The card of the devil portrays a creature that is half man and half goat, and that devil is the scapegoat we blame for all our troubles in life. Hitler blamed his scapegoat, the Jews. But all of us have our scapegoats. That is none other than the hidden force which makes us believe that we are imprisoned by external forces out of our control, when in reality it is the internal force of the devil that's within us. The devil has heavy feet, goat horns, a revised pentagram on the forehead, a raised right hand and lowered left side with a torch. The devil squats on a square pedestal with two naked human demons with tails chained to it, and the devil's appearance is nothing short of that of a beast. The nudity of the man and the woman is a symbol of pleasure-seeking and shamelessness. The chains indicate that they are prisoners of their own lives and themselves. The devil represents bondage by accepting an unwanted situation. The day of individual happiness has passed. The devil's card represents feelings tied down against your will. Did the German people feel tied down against their will? Or did they choose the devil to rule over them? Did they allow themselves to lose their independence by permitting themselves to be controlled by the Third Reich? All propaganda has to be popular and has to accommodate itself to the comprehension of the least intelligent of those whom it seeks to reach. The devil's card represents addiction, enslavement, and submission to another. With the devil card, people are being caught up in appearances by believing only in the physical and forgetting the spiritual by choosing to stay in the dark. For 11 years, Germany was in the dark, fearing the unknown but taken in by appearances. The devil is the symbol for what is bad and undesirable, but teaches us that good and bad are not separated, just as you cannot separate a shadow from its source. By the skillful and sustained use of propaganda, one can make people see even heaven as hell, or extremely wretched life as paradise. The devil card is synonymous with temptation, excess manipulation, and loss of control. Hitler represented all of these characteristics when he became enslaved to his power and excesses. Additional meaning of this card includes anger, jealousy, resentment, self-delusion, selfishness, and violence. Moreover, of course, Hitler represented all of these characteristics. Trapped with all the terrors associated with this card, he was unable to escape. There was no escape for Hitler, nor for the people who followed him. Like Hitler, the devil card draws us to him with promises and glimpses of the good things. As Hitler wrote, "After 15 years of war I have achieved as a common German soldier, and merely with fanatical willpower, the unity of the German nation, and have freed it from the death sentence of Versailles." Finally, the devil card introduces you with twisted propaganda, attitude, and beliefs. It whispers lies and suggestions in your ear to make you angry, jealous, selfish, and violent. The devil seeks power and control over others and encourages discrimination, sexism, and racism. This card further represents knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing, because great liars are also great magicians, because anyone can deal with victory, but only the mighty can bear defeat. Yes, Hitler was a great liar and a great magician, and he did not betray himself. He knew who he was and the battle he was fighting for the darkness. He dared to be evil, because millions of Germans had not dared to be good, I concluded. Extraordinary, Myra, Yue said. Thank you, Yue, I answered. I disagree with you in Hitler being a liar, Lialib said seriously. What do you mean? Yue asked, surprised. I'm just quoting Elie Wiesel. I have more faith in Hitler than anyone else. He alone has kept his promises, all his promises, to the Jewish people, Lialib answered, laughing. The three of us laughed at Lialib's occurrence. What commandment do you bring to the darkness from Hitler? Yue asked. It is not truth that matters, but victory, I answered. That's a good one, Yue replied. Thank you, Yue, I stated. After the war was over, people in Europe blamed the Germans alone for the Holocaust. The Germans then turned the blame on the Nazis, and subsequently the Nazis blamed Hitler. But we know that's not true, because everyone knew or suspected that the genocide was taking place. The hypocrisy of the people of the light is the mother of all evil and racial prejudice. No habit or quality is more natural to acquire than hypocrisy. The people of the light preach something, but they practice the opposite. These people pretend to have a noble character, moral principles, or religious beliefs, but are real hypocrites. They continue to hold to their lies and try their best to make them the truth by believing that wrongs aren't wrong if good people like themselves do it. Lialib said. Yue and I laughed at Lialib's last sentence. Anything else you want to add before visiting Hitler himself? Yue asked. No one will ask the victor if he told the truth, and at the end of this game between the light and the darkness, our truth will stay forever, I concluded.